Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Ecosystem Valuation Seminar. I will be your resource speaker for today's event. My name is Gerald Elio. I am a faculty at the Mindanao State University Iligan Institute of Technology. I'm currently pursuing the Doctor in Sustainable Development Studies, majoring in Sustainable Economic Development. My background is in economics, where I took my Bachelor of Science in Economics at the University of the Philippines in Los Baños and my Master's in Development Economics at the Ateneo de Manila University. And here is the outline of my presentation. So, first, I will be introducing the basic concepts of economics and natural resources, where I will be discussing first the environment and the ecosystem services just to have playing field for each and every one of you here, because I understand that not all of you here are economics graduates. I will be talking about the concept of value, welfare economics and economic value, like the total economic value, and I will be giving some practical applications of this ecosystem valuation, particularly the EVs or the economic valuations that were done by the government in the past. And on the second part of my presentation, I will be talking about the different methods of economic assessment. And I will be concentrating on the contingent valuation method for the stated preference approach, the change in productivity approach, and the reveal preference approach or the travel cost method. I will be giving examples on each of these methods. All right, so let me start first by differentiating the environment and the ecosystem. So the environment is the total aggregate surrounding things, both biotic or living and abiotic or non-living, and the conditions that influence the life of an individual organism or population, including humans. It covers various ecosystems to which it is interchanged with most of the time. On the other hand, ecosystem is defined as a geographic area where plants, animals, and other organisms, as well as weather and landscape, work together to form a bubble of life. It is the area where both biotic and abiotic factors interact in a dynamic manner as a functional unit. Meaning to say, if one part is damaged, it can have an impact on the whole system. The key difference between the two is that environment is the surroundings, while ecosystems are the interactions of these things in the environment. Environment can be taken on a macro, like um, economic, demographic, cultural, etc., or micro, like the factors close to the firm that affects its operation, like customers, suppliers, markets, among others. Ecosystems can be terrestrial or marine, inland or coastal, rural or urban. The common ones we hear about are wastelands, watersheds, forest, wetlands, and etc. Now, let me talk about the ecosystem services. There are actually four: provisioning, second is regulating, third is cultural services, and the last one is the supporting services. So the provisioning services are the products obtained from the ecosystems, like the food and fresh water. We also get fuel, wood, fiber, biochemicals, and genetic resources that are provided by the fauna and the flora. And the regulating services are the benefits obtained from the regulation of this ecosystem processes, like climate regulation, disease regulation, as well as water regulation, water purification, as well as pollination. For the non-material benefits obtained from the ecosystems that enrich our lives, remember, early Filipinos believe in spirits. So the actually got that idea from the environment. So the spiritual and religious practices, recreation, and ecotourism, we have plenty of this one nearby. Aesthetic or the beauty of the nature that we enjoy. The inspirational, some artists like songwriters, painters are actually getting their inspiration from the environment. The educational, because we learn a lot from the ecosystem, a sense of place and belongingness, as well as the cultural heritage. And lastly, we have the supporting services, the underpinning services that enable other services to function. So we have soil formation, nutrient recycling, and of course the primary production for the raw materials that we derive from nature. Moving on with the concept of value. So this is just a measure of the extent to which people want or like a good or service. So this is a anthropocentric utilitarian construct, or this is human-centered. So there are two categories. We have use values and the non-use values. To further differentiate between the two, the use value could actually involve the direct use value or the indirect use value. So with the direct use value, we actually consider food, fuel, raw materials. So we can actually get those things, utilize it, okay, for our own satisfaction. So indirect use value. So this is the value derived from the ecosystem services, like what I mentioned earlier, the regulation of water or the flood control, climate regulation, as well as some other things. And the option value, this is the value of the future potential of a complete and healthy environment like the genetic resources. So option means to say either we use it or not. For the non-use value, we have the legacy or the altruistic value. So the value of leaving the environment intact for future generations, as well as the intrinsic value or the value of the nature and its beauty by and for itself, or the existence value. Valuation is a process of attributing a value, either economic or non-economic, to something. So economic valuation could measure things in monetary terms, like the people's preferences for the benefits they obtain from, for example, ecosystem processes. And the non-economic valuation examines how the options of people are shaped or their preferences articulated mostly beyond monetary terms. So market valuation is basically a set of methods used to measure the people's willingness to pay for certain goods and services that are not traded in the market. So improvement in inequality, for example, or conservation of culturally significant tourist sites. So the importance of the non-market valuation is that it helps to measure the trade-offs between people and governments are willing to make so as to improve the allocation of private and public resources. The second is it generates monetary estimates that are easy for policymakers to understand and compare with alternative use of resources. Now let's talk about welfare economics and economic value. Welfare economics deals with the optimal allocation of resources. Optimal meaning to say that's the maximum allocation of resources that will serve each individual or entity in the best way while minimizing waste or residuals and subject to the limits of inputs or availability of the factors of production. So we have the land or the environment, we have labor and capital. It should be economically efficient, such that the outputs or the goods and services are the highest combination of quantity and the quality given by the technology and scarce resources. And welfare economics or social welfare maximization is also often linked with sustainable development, not only to ensure the benefits trickling equally to different groups of people, but also for the future generations. Now let's have the consumer and the producer surplus as well as the market equilibrium. On the left side, we have here the consumer surplus. So this is basically the difference between the price that a consumer is prepared to pay and the actual price paid the consumers are willing to pay. Like, for example, the green portion here represents the consumer surplus. For example, the entrance fee of a resort is 10 pesos. That's the P1. But customers are willing to pay from 10 pesos up to, let's say, 100 pesos. So the difference between the willingness to pay and the price that is actually paid constitute the consumer surplus. In the middle, we have the producer surplus. So this is the difference between the price that the producers are willing and able to supply a good for and the price the consumers are willing to accept the goods. All right. Like for example, if again the price that the producers are willing to accept, let's have the reverse. Like for example, the entrance of the resort is like 10 pesos. That's the amount that the owners are willing to accept, but people are willing to pay as much as 100 pesos. So the difference again between the amount that consumers paid and the price that the producers are willing to accept constitute the producer surplus. All right. And if we try to look at the total economic surplus, we basically add the consumer surplus, the one in green, and the producer surplus, the one in pink. And this will actually reach an equilibrium market price. In a perfectly competitive market, so there are actually conditions for us to say that the market is competitive. We have the marginal private cost, okay, is equal to the marginal benefits to the society. That is also equal to the price and, of course, equal to the marginal utility. Utility simply means satisfaction in economics. Now, uh, economic valuation's aim is to measure in monetary terms the people's preferences to the benefits they obtain from the ecosystem processes. So it is human-centric or anthropocentric in nature, or valuation is only based on the benefits and costs as they affect the welfare of humans. It relies on detailed information from the natural sciences, and it requires evidence of willingness to pay and willingness to accept. Well, the total economic value is a concept in the cost benefit analysis that refers to the value derived from people from a natural resource, a man made heritage resource, or an infrastructure system compared to not having it. So we have here a illustration of the total economic value. We have on the left, we have the use value, and on the right, we have the non-use value. So for the direct use value, we have the output or the services that can be consumed directly. So we have marine fisheries and tourism, for example. We have the indirect use value. We have the functional benefits enjoyed indirectly arising from the ecosystem function. So we have the ecosystem resilience. And for the option value, we'll have the future direct and the indirect use. For the non-use value, we have the bequest value or the value placed on conserving resources for future generations. And we have the existence value or the value from knowledge of continued existence of resource, for example, the endangered species. So there is a decreasing tangibility of value to the individual from the use value to the non-use value. I have here an example of the total economic value. So, example is surfing. So that's a direct use. All right. So you're gonna, of course, use the sea for surfing or ocean for that matter. And the indirect use value would be the resource used indirectly. Like for example, you don't really wanna surf, but you just wanna like go to Siargao or La Union to watch people surf. The option value would be the future possible use. Like for example, if you'd like to surf there someday. And for the non-use value, the biggest value is the use for future generations. Like, I like my kids to be able to surf there. So I want that particular resource to be preserved in the future generations. And the existence value is basically the right of existence. Like, I'll never surf ever, but I am glad it exists. All right. So basically, you're just enjoying nature without having, to experience it for yourself. Like, I mean, surfing. Okay. Let's move on with the practical applications of ecosystem valuation. I have three cases here. The first one is sample case in Thailand. So this is an ecosystem valuation in investment decisions between mangroves and shrimp farm conservation. So if you're gonna look at the market value of the mangroves, compared it with the market value of a shrimp farm, it's very easy to make a decision. All right, like in this case, the market value of mangrove is $864 per hectare. That's the provisioning services of timber and non-timber. Whereas the market value in converted to shrimp farm is $9,632 per hectare for the shrimp production. But if you will be considering the non-market value, which is around 16,861 per hectare, that's a coastal protection from the storms, the breeding area, source of food of marine species, and among others. So if you have to make a decision based on this, you do not want to convert. The second case would be in Pagbilao, Quezon for around 323 hectares of mangrove cover. So we have here the value of mangroves for cutting and logging. The production is around 46 million or 142,000 pesos per hectare. And if you try to look at the value of mangroves if protected and conserved, the carbon stock potential is around 115 million. The fisheries production around 123 million pesos. Mangrove coastal protection from storm surge and typhoon is 4.5 million. Socioeconomic cultural services around 1.6 million, and the use for subsistence is around 1 million. So the total value is around 245 million or 750,000 per hectare. And the third case would be the degradation of the upper Marikina River basin protected landscape. So we all know that Marikina is one of the areas in the Philippines that is constantly being flooded. So there is an impending problem, or there's a recurring problem of flood in Marikina. So if you can see the picture on the left, that's the usual scenario that people experience during the rainy season. The integration of green gray solution would be the protection and rehabilitation of upper Marikina River Basin protected landscape and the implementation of flood control and mitigation projects. So the benefits derived from forests in the in upper Marikina would be the increase of 149 to 167% water yields during the driest months. It could also reduce floodwater up to 47% and decrease the risk of soil erosion by 68% to 99% per hectare. Okay, let's have the topology of economic valuation. So it can be divided into two. We have the stated preference as well as the revealed preference methods. So with the stated preference, so this is based on the simulation of the market through administered questionnaire of a sample. So we can use the contingent valuation method, which I will be discussing later on. We also have the conjoint choice or choice experiments. The conjoint rating, where you will rate the strength of the preference on a cardinal scale. Um, and the revealed preference methods will be using the actual or the past behavior to derive value. So they rely on the link between a market good and an ecosystem service, and the fact that demand for the market good is influenced by the quality of the ecosystem service. People are revealing their preference. That's the reason why it's called the reveal preference methods through their choices. The two main methods could be the travel cost, which I will be explaining on the latter slides. And of course, the second one is the hedonic pricing approach. Okay, so what is a contingent valuation method? So this is actually implemented through a survey, and the purpose is to assess how individuals would hypothetically react to changes in environmental quality or ecosystem service provision. It elicits from respondents how much they would be willing to pay to access improved environmental quality or ecosystem service, or avoid a hypothetical reduction in the environmental quality or economic service. So the values are elicited are contingent on the hypothetical market which respondents are presented. Okay, so the value of the environmental good or ecosystem is basically the mean willingness to pay multiplied to the affected population. Um, the value of the ecosystem services. So most environmental goods are not traded and are unpriced. So economic values are not easy to observe. So like the value of ecosystem services, the environmental goods have public good characteristics. So we have the non-exclusivity and the non-divisible or non-rivalness and consumption. So non-exclusive, meaning to say that you cannot really prevent other people from enjoying a particular scenery. Like for example, you cannot prevent others from enjoying the the trees, the flowers, and of course the animals they're in. All right. And non-divisible, meaning to say that if you are enjoying nature, if you are enjoying the scenery, the aesthetic value of the place, you cannot really I mean your utility or your satisfaction will not be affected. Okay. We have here the contingent valuation methodology. So we just assume that the individual's utility function or satisfaction before an ecosystem service quality improvement is given is V sub 0, or this is the initial, right? And this is a function of Y, which is the income, the P is the price index, E sub 0 is the initial quality of the good or service, and the C is a vector of all other variables of concern. Okay, so this is actually for the things that beyond measure or the error term. After improving the quality of the ecosystem service from E sub 0 to E sub 1, the individual's utility becomes V1, or a factor of income, the price index, improvement in the ecosystem, or the E1, and the Z is the error term. So the individual's maximum willingness to pay for the quality improvement can be defined by the following equation. So V sub 0, or uh, the original valuation given by the income, the price index, the initial environmental condition, and the error term is just equal to the valuation, which is the income or the Y minus the willingness to pay, the price index, the ecosystem improvement, as well as the error term. So this can actually be solved with the use of statistical software. So you don't really have to worry. Just have to make sure that the data are available. So in a contingent valuation methodology, the willingness to pay is represented by the U, or the utility function. Again, that's a satisfaction as a function of the income. X would be for the prices you pay for the goods or service. Okay, in this case, we have here in the picture, we have the TV set, we have the cell phone, and we have the car. And E zip 0 is actually the initial environmental condition. So we have here the forest affected by forest fires. We have the polluted Bay Area and the solid waste. And the income minus the willingness to pay is just the initial condition, the E sub zero, like the forest fires to probably tree planting activities that would ensure that the trees or the forest will be conserved for the future generations. There is a caution that we need to bear in mind that valuing the environment or life are misleading statements. So, what is being valued is people's preferences or choices in the changes in the state of the environment or preferences for changes in the level of risk to their lives. Okay, and the willingness to pay for improvement in air, water quality, increased biodiversity, increased protection of endangered species, etc. Um, what would you be willing to pay to prevent the very nice beach on the left from turning into the one you can see on the right? So that's the question that you need to answer when we are doing the contingent valuation. So the economic concept of value, how changes in environment and natural resources systems affect human welfare. And the basic premise in welfare economics is each individual is the best judge of how well off he is or she is in a given situation. So of course, people have to understand what they are valuing. So what would you pay to save some animal that swims in the sea from extinction? We have the turtle here, and we have here the sea cow that eat grasses, and some other species. So we have here the seahorses. And how do we and how do you describe what a watershed is the is to the average man on the street? Okay, so we have here in the picture we have the atmosphere, we have the rain, which is the input, then the output would be the water that will go to the households. Okay, now let's have the CVM valuations in developing countries. So we have here the improvement in water supply or quality, improvements in sanitation services like the connection to sewage system, wastewater treatment, which is not really popular in the Philippines, but I'm glad that they're starting in Manila. They have the preservation of national parks, heritage sites, etc. Setting of entrance fees to recreational sites, endangered species conservation, and of course the public health programs. So there are stages of the CV or the contingent valuation that is being followed. So the first stage of the CV design is actually the survey. I mean, the initial research. Okay, all right. So on the first stage, you have to begin with a theoretical model. So you have to identify the different information required from the questionnaire. All right. So you have to generate predictions, so check results like economic theory and existing literature. You also have to team up with local institutions for the study. You can do, or you have to do scoping during initial field visits like the key informant interviews, focus group discussions, and others. And you have to prepare sampling framework like the list of visitors, consumers, households, as well as the area map. Okay, for the second stage, you have the choice of survey method and elicitation technique. So you can actually choose among telephone, You could also do the mail or email drop off in person interview through the internet and others. All right. And the type of elicitation format, you can have the open ended, like what is the most you would be willing to pay for the good? You can also have the bidding game, wherein the uh, WTP or the willingness to pay amounts are increasing until respondents rejects. All right. So with this type of format, you have to ask first if you are willing to pay for a good X. Okay, so if the respondent is willing, then you have to proceed. But if not, then you have to stop. Okay, in the second stage, you can actually have also the payment cards. So this could provide a range of values for the willingness to pay, and as which one is the highest that he or she is willing to pay. Like you can have it an increment of 25. Okay, so 25, 50 to 150. So you will be able to determine what will be the amount that the respondent is no longer willing to pay. So you example, please indicate which amount shown on the card your household would be willing to pay as annual increase in your tax over a period of 5 years for the biodiversity improvement. So something like that. For the third is the choice of a population sample. So you have to design a sampling strategy. So you have to define the population, specify the sampling frame, select the strategy. You also have to determine the sample size and specify a replacement strategy for households who refuse to participate in the survey. In the fourth stage of the CV survey, you have to design a questionnaire and you have to make a good introduction in order to establish credentials of the survey. So you also have to provide a brief background and the purpose. You have to inform your respondents how their name was pre-selected. You have to assume or assure the answers are confidential, and you have to inform the respondents on the length and time to complete the survey. Okay. You also have to tell the respondents they have the right to refuse if they don't want to answer. You can also provide alternative sources of verification, like for example, if they're doubtful if it's a legit or not, and the administrator screener questions before starting the interview. So the language used must be very clear. Like for example, you're in Mindanao, you can actually ask the respondents in the local dialect. Um, you can also ask for the reliable data, like household income, like remittance, pension, etc., in the income bracket. Just an estimate. The fifth stage is the implementation of the survey. And in order to do this, you have to make sure that the enumerators are well trained. Okay, so enumerators, be thoroughly familiar with the questionnaire, of course. They also serve as the additional representative for the focus group discussion, and they should minimize potential biases in the willingness to pay answers. You have to make a pre-testing, and of course, you need to finalize the questionnaire. Then on the sixth stage, you have the data analysis. And you have to make sure The objectives are being targeted on the questionnaire. So you have to determine the value placed in the provision of the non-market goods by the households in the population through estimating the mean willingness to pay. You also have to determine how the willingness to pay is influenced by characteristics of the policy, household, or survey design, and you have to test the validity of the willingness to pay response to a survey. The seventh would be the test, and the last one would be the aggregation and reporting. So we have an example here, saving the Philippine Eagles. How much will this cost? And are Filipinos willing to pay for it? So we have here the main research questions. Are Filipinos willing to pay to support Philippine Eagle Conservation Program? If so, how much are they willing to pay? So will the WTP amount of aggregate be sufficient to cover the cost of implementing the Philippine Eagle Conservation Program? So for the design, for the survey data and questionnaire design, you have to make focus group discussions, academe, community, offsite, and onsite, with an average of 10 persons. Question translation to local dialects. You can actually translate again just to make sure that the questions will be understood by the respondents. Then, with this particular study, they had pilot testing in Manila, offsite, and Davao City on-site. And they also conducted a drop-off survey. And the refinements would be the non-response items, ambiguous questions, as well as the question sequencing. So when choosing for the payment vehicle, so this is actually the method that they will need to use to carry on the survey. So the choice of the payment vehicle is actually based on the scope and coverage. So electric bill, for example, in the pretest protest response of 45% under the scenario of, well, people will be skeptical because there will be an increase in the electric charges, successive oil increase, or corruption and political instability. So you'll be able to get this one in a pretest. And they also explored another PV, which is an water bill, but unfortunately, that has an impending increase in water bill during the time of the survey. So people will definitely be biased because of this one. The dichotomous choice approach with referendum format, meaning yes or no, and the bid levels vary from 5 pesos to 150 pesos, and this is actually determined after the series of pre-tests. All right, like for example, if the people are no longer willing to pay beyond 100 pesos, then you have to put the level of the bid up to 100. So for the survey instrument, you have the introductory part, and you have to provide the concerns in relation to other social concerns. So this is actually the components of the survey. Um, the second section would be the attitude and the knowledge of the respondents. The third section constituted the valuation questions, the willingness to pay for a comprehensive Philippine Eagle Conservation Program, and the last one is the respondents' profile. There is a mandatory question here, the evaluation question, like, would you vote to support the Mindanao Eagle Comprehensive Conservation Program to protect the Philippine eagle and its habitat? If it will cost your household a monthly payment of blank, then they have to provide this one. All right, to be added to your utility bill over the next 5 years. And in analyzing the response, it could be open-ended or discrete or with the use of the payment card. So the relatively simple way to estimate is actually the open-ended. And this can be refined using the Tobit models to take count of the peak at zero willingness to pay. So you can actually make a regression analysis using the different statistical softwares that you have. The logistic regression models, legit regressions because it's only yes or no, right? So, like for example, if they're willing to pay, then that would be explained by the different factors. Okay. So since it's just again it's just a yes or no, then you can actually have the legit regression. And it takes account the percentage of response to different bid levels. And again, this can be easily done in a statistical package. I would just like to mention some of the disadvantages of the CV. Okay, the one is it's obviously hypothetical in nature. So you will be asking the respondents, but they're not actually paying it. Okay, the respondents are usually unacquainted with the prospect of placing a peso value on environmental or public goods. And the way in which the WTP question is posed may have biases on the value estimates. So it's actually prone to biases and of course protest bidders or people are not really willing to pay for anything. Okay. And the advantages of the contingent valuation is that it's very flexible and can deal with both use and unused values. So the answers to the willingness to pay or accept go directly to the theoretically correct monetary measures of utility changes. It is most widely accepted method for estimating total economic value and has been used in court litigation. So the nature and the results of the CV studies are not difficult to analyze. Okay, because you're actually using the dollar values, or in this case, in the Philippines, you have to use the peso values in terms of the mean or the median value per capita or per household, or as an aggregate value for the affected population. The great deal of research is being conducted to improve the methodology, make results more valid and reliable, and better understand incidence and limitation. All right, so now let's have the second method. We have the productivity method. And this is also referred as the net factor income derived from the value method. So we can actually estimate the economic value of ecosystem products or services that contribute to the production of commercially marketed goods. So it is applied in cases where the products or services of an ecosystem are used along with other inputs produced on a marketed good. For instance, water quality affects the productivity of irrigated agricultural crops or the cost of purifying municipal drinking water. So thus, the economic benefits of improved water quality can be measured by the increased revenues from greater agricultural productivity or the decreased cost of providing clean water. So with the use of productivity method, you can have if you are familiar with the Cobb-Douglas production function, the input-output model, um, and development envelope analysis model, you can have this productivity method. So we have here a hypothetical situation. So for example, a reservoir that provides water for the city's drinking water is being polluted by agricultural runoff. So the agency staff want to determine the economic benefits of measures to eliminate the runoff. So why use the productivity method? This method will be selected because this is a straightforward case where environmental quality directly affects the cost of producing a marketed good. In this case, you have the municipal drinking water. The advantages of using this method is that it's very straightforward, and although the data requirements are limited, the relevant data may be readily available. So the method can be relatively inexpensive to apply since again you will be relying on the secondary data. However, there are limitations that you have to bear in mind that the method is limited to valuing those resources that can be used as inputs. When valuing an ecosystem, not all services will be related to the production of marketed goods. In this case, we have water as an example. So the value inferred of that ecosystem may understate its true value to society. And information is needed on the scientific relationships between actions to improve quality or quantity. In some cases, these relationships may not be well known or understood. If the changes in the natural resource affected the market price of the final good or the prices of any other production inputs, the method becomes much more complicated and difficult to apply. Okay, and now we're done. We're down to the last method. We have the reveal the preference, and this is the travel cost method. Um, this is used to estimate economic values associated with ecosystems or sites that are used for recreation. So usually you will be able to get the data, like for example, you can get a secondary data from a resort. So like the number of visitors, the frequency of visits. You can also ask some demographic questions with this one. So the method can be used to estimate economic benefits resulting from changes in access costs for a site, elimination of an existing recreational site. Like for example, if this recreation site will be replaced by something economically viable, addition of a new recreational site or expansion or the changes in the quality of the environment at a recreational site. Um, there are options for applying the travel cost method. Okay, we have one. First is the zonal travel cost. Okay, so mostly secondary data is being utilized. The next one is the an individual travel cost approach. This is actually more detailed. You have to ask the visitors, but this is very challenging. And the last one is the random utility approach using a survey and other data. So I'll be giving an example for the simple zonal travel cost method and the individual travel cost method in the next few slides. Okay, so here are the steps that being followed in the zonal travel cost method. So the first is to define the zones. So this may be defined by concentric circles around the site or by geographic divisions that make sense, such as metropolitan areas or counties surrounding the site at the different distances. The second step is to collect information on the number of visitors from each zone and the number of visits made in that particular year. So we have an example here. The zip code can actually be used to calculate the visits per zone or over the past year. But I think in the Philippines we don't normally ask this particular question. We have of course the zones, right? I mean the zip codes, and we can actually estimate how far that particular place to the recreational site. Okay, so the third step is to calculate the visitation rates per 1,000 population in each zone. So this is simply the total visits per year from the zone divided by the zone's population in thousands. So we have here from zone 0 to 3, and we can actually check for the total visits per year. And for the first 400 visits, depending on the zone, we have here the population on that particular zone, 1,000 to 8,000, and the visits per 1,000 from 400 to 50, and beyond 3, that's going to be 0, and the total visits would be 1,600. In the fourth step, you have to calculate the average round trip travel distance and time from each zone. So assume that the people in zone 0 have 0 travel distance and time. All right. And in the zone 1, the round trip travel distance is 20 kilometers in the Philippines, and it's miles in the US. The travel time would be 30, 30 minutes. And the cost per mile is 30. And the travel times or the cost per minute is 15, assuming the cost per hour is $9. And the travel cost or the trip would be equal to $10.50. So that's $6 for the distance, for the cost per mile, and of course the cost per minute, which is 15 cents. That's a total of $4.50. So that means to say that the total cost of the round trip is $10.50. All right. Then as you move along, then the farther the zone is from the residence, then of course the travel trip time, distance, and the cost per minute would also increase. The fifth step would be to estimate using the regression analysis. So the equation that relates visits per capita to travel costs and other important variables. So in this particular case, the researcher could actually estimate the demand function of the average visitor. Um, in this simple model, the analysis might also include demographic values like age, income, gender, education, um, using the average values for each zone. And to maintain the simplest possible model calculation, the equation will only travel costs and visits per 1,000. The sixth step is to construct a demand function for visits to the site using the results of the regression analysis. The first point of the demand curve is total visitors to the site at the current cost. And the other points are found by estimating the number of visitors with different hypothetical entrance fees, assuming that the entrance fee is waived in the same way as travel cost. For the purpose of our example, assume we have a $10 entrance fee. We just have to plug this into the estimated regression, which is V is equal to 330 minus 7.55 cents. See, so this actually gives us the following figures. So again, you have to make use of the regression analysis, but I'm not gonna discuss that here in this seminar. I think a lot of you here are very familiar with different statistical packages since you are all undergraduates, and at one point in your student life, you're able to make a research. Okay, this gives the second point in the demand curve, the 954 visits, so an entry fee of $10. So in the same way, the number of visits are for increasing interest fees can be calculated to get this one. This figure here, you have the interest fee of $20 to 50. You have the total visits from 400 down to zero when it's at 50. Okay, the next step is to estimate the total economic benefit. So we can actually do this by looking at the results of the total estimate of the economic benefits from the recreational use. So the site uses around 23,000 US dollars per year, or around 14.38 per visit, or that's basically 23,000 US dollars divided by 1,600 visits. So how do we interpret or use the results? Remember that the agency staff objective was to decide whether it is worthwhile to spend money on programs and actions to protect the site. So if the action costs less than 23,000 US dollars per year, then the cost will be less than the benefits provided by the site. So if the costs are greater than this, the staff will have to decide whether other factors make them worthwhile. Okay, then the second one is the individual travel cost approach. Okay, and this is actually similar to the zonal approach, but again, this uses a survey from individual visitors, and again, this is a little bit challenging. And this requires more data collection and slightly more complicated analysis, but will definitely give a precise result. Okay, so for a hypothetical example, like for example, if we're gonna use the individual travel cost method in getting the value for a recreational fishing site, then you have to include in the survey the questions relating to vital informations like the location of the the visitor, how many times he or she visits the site, the length of the trip, if he or she is successful in his fishing activity, the amount spent on travel expenses, income, reasons for the trip, and others. Okay, let me just give you the advantages as well as the disadvantages later on of the travel cost method. So this actually mimics the more conventional empirical techniques used by the experts in the field, and it's based on actual behavior. So what people actually do rather than stated the willingness to pay. So we need to say that, they actually visited the place. Unlike with the willingness to pay, we're in hypothetically just have to ask how much they're willing to pay for an environment to be protected or improved. The method is inexpensive to apply, especially with the zonal travel cost method, because again, you have to rely on the secondary data. The on service provide opportunities for large sample sizes. And there is actually a possibility that the respondents are very excited to participate, and the results are relatively easy to interpret and explain. However, there are certain issues or limitations that we need to consider. Okay, the first one is the most simple models assume that individuals take a trip for a single purpose. Okay, so not all the time wherein people visit the area, and that's the only thing that they want to visit. All right, like for example, if we're gonna have a trip, then where we actually look for other places nearby where we can enjoy, right? Like for example, if we're gonna go to the Hilayan, then definitely we have to like drop off or visit Cagayan City, Claveria, or other places. And in defining the mesh and measuring the opportunity cost of time, and again, the opportunity cost is basically the cost of the second best alternative use of a particular resource. So there is an opportunity cost of time, right? And because the time is spent traveling could have been used, again, it is an opportunity cost. But then again, if there are too many alternatives, then this is quite challenging to measure. Another limitation is the ability of substitute sites. So if two people travel the same distance, for example, we basically assume that they have the same value. So for example, if the same distance, but there are other alternative areas for the other visitor to enjoy, then that would be somewhat problematic. Okay. Another limitation or issue that we have to consider is the travel cost method assumes that people perceive and respond to changes in travel costs the same way that they would respond to changes in the admission price, because it's not all the time wherein people are very respondent to changes in the price. Like for example, if there will be an increase. Okay, let's take Timoga for example. So before the interest was only 50 and I think it's now 100 per person, then that will not be a consideration. Like for example, if people will be traveling from a far distance, then 50 pesos or 100 pesos is immaterial, or it doesn't really matter at all. All right. And those who value certain sites may choose to live nearby. Okay. So, for example, if you really love the beach, then most likely you will be buying a property in Palawan or in Coron or in Siargao. And this will actually affect the travel cost, right? And some people would even buy property on the site if they really love the services that the nature provides. Okay, but the high values for the site are not captured by the method. Another is interviewing visitors on site can introduce sampling biases to the analysis. So probably they're not gonna tell right budget or the expenses that they are incurring during their travel. So in measuring the recreational quality, the relating recreational quality to environmental quality could also be very difficult. And The standard travel cost approaches provides information about current conditions, but not about gains or losses from anticipated changes in resource conditions. Okay, and now we're down to the last slide, and these are the three limitations that we have to remember. So the travel cost method assumes that people proceed to respond to changes travel costs the same way they would respond in order to estimate the demand function. Okay, there needs to be enough difference between the distance traveled to affect travel costs and for the distances and travel cost. The travel cost method is limited in its scope and application because it requires user participation. It can be used to assign values to an on-site environmental feature and functions that users of the site do not find valuable. Sorry. And lastly, as in all statistical methods, certain statistical problems can affect the results. So this includes choice of the function for use and estimate the demand function. I think this is the reason why you have to consider the error term because that will actually capture all the variables that will not be explained during the regression analysis. Okay, that would be all. Thank you so much for listening.